this evening to this lecture hosted by UCL Institute for Sustainable Heritage. My name is Catherine and I'm one of the lecturers here. And I'm delighted this evening to be introducing Boris Pretzel from Victorian Albert Museum for his talk, Contradictions in Conservation. So just to give a brief introduction to Boris, Boris has been at the V&A for nearly 30 years and now heads the science section in the Conservation and Collections Management division there. He has responsibilities for strategic heritage science issues, including storage, display and preservation of artefacts. His research interests include the interaction of artefacts with their environment, lighting, perception and colour measurement, and materials analysis. And Boris is on the editorial board for the Journal of Cultural Heritage, former president of IRUG, former coordinator of the ICOMCC Preventive Conservation Work Group. And I'm also really enjoying currently working on a PhD project with Boris on the photodegradation of plastics. So I think that's quite enough. So I'll hand it over to Boris.
Thank you very much. It's not going to be controversial. I was told I can't do controversial. It's V&A policy. We don't do controversial. So, but I'm going to try and stimulate some thought about some of the things I've been thinking about. So I'm going to start simply with an introduction to where I work, and then a very quick guided tour that comes some of the things we've done over the past couple of years and why we've done them, where we are. And then I'm going to say maybe that doesn't really help us, or maybe it does. So this is the Victorian Albert Museum, 80,000 square metres of space, roughly half of it dedicated to display at the moment. Some 60,000, just under 60,000 objects on display in this building. This is the heart and soul of the V&A, although we do have other sites, and we are going to be moving east at some stage, not 2020, I think. Over the past 10, 15 years, we've been undergoing, as our current director puts it, open heart surgery, and we've developed some, well over 15 galleries now, which have involved some form of treatment and rehousing of over 50,000 objects. Now, I have to say, 30,000 of those objects was a quick skip and page, so it's not 50,000 objects that we treated, but still a vast amount of objects. This slide is slightly old now because it doesn't contain our last two galleries, which are the revamp of the Toshiba Gallery, that's the Japanese gallery, and also the opening finally of Europe 1600 to 1815, appropriately named 1815, not 1800, which would, can't hear me, sorry. Appropriately named 1815 because there is one piece, the Wellington piece in there, which we needed to extend the dates for, but that was always planned. Wonderful gallery. If you haven't seen it, it opened not that long ago, a few months ago, well worth a visit. The V&A has become very good at having stunning displays of its objects. Maybe therefore the balance between care and access it changes all the time, and we are making good use of our objects, and some would say too much interaction with our objects. So these are some of my favourite galleries, and one of the things I wanted to say is we're moving from most objects, most sensitive objects in cases, to more and more galleries like the medieval Renaissance galleries, the furniture gallery, with objects on open display. We don't have very many air-conditioned galleries, but we have some, over 10%. We used to go by BS 5454, or we tried to. BS 5454, at least these early encounters, up to and including, I would say, BS 5454 2000, which has started there, was very restrictive in what it was recommended. And as a result of not meeting BS 5454, but attempting to, we had an annual energy consumption of some 17 terawatt hours per year. That's over £1 million a year on power, of which about a third went on lighting, about a third went on sort of heating and air conditioning where we have it, and the rest went on other things like airflow, a bit on computers, a bit on travel. This is data from 2012. We don't do this kind of precise survey, not very precise survey, but this breakdown is quite difficult to do. We don't do that often. In the early days, in 2000, we decided we were finally in a position to start monitoring our climate very thoroughly throughout any area where the V&A stores objects, be that a studio, be that a gallery, be that in a case, be that in stores. And since then, since 2003, we have very, very comprehensive data sets. So we can start doing things. If you don't measure what you're looking at, it's very, very difficult to be able to anticipate what you might be doing to your objects. So early on, in about 2004 this was, we looked at a typical air-conditioned gallery, and yeah, that's the air-conditioned gallery, and that's the same gallery that the air conditioning was on. And we tried to say, what's happening with these gallery spaces? Is the air conditioning actually doing it? I have to say, this is retrofitted air conditioning, and as you can see, it's not really what an engineer's trace of an air conditioned gallery would look like. This is what was happening in the space. And we quickly found out that if we're looking at objects which are not particularly sensitive to their climatic fluctuations or the rate of fluctuations, then in fact the un-air-conditioned spaces, because they get a bit colder, were better in terms of longevity for items which are not sensitive to fluctuations. So if you work on isotherms came up as an idea in the late 90s. We started looking at these in the early 2000s. And we made a suggestion for our IBA store based on having conditions where we monitor conditions based on the longevity of a typical paper-based artifact. And I cheekily made the recommendation that we would be better putting our collection in a skip with an umbrella on it and keeping it in the gallery. Of course, those are only for the things which are not sensitive to fluctuations. Most of our things are sensitive to fluctuations, and they will be very good outside. So, going through the time, the kind of analysis we've done on climates, I'm starting with climates. We started early in 2000 by measuring the climate systematically all year round in every area where we have objects. We went on to develop what we call climate traffic lights. That's looking at the proportion of large variations compared to moderate variations compared to small variations in order to give some kind of risk associated with different objects. So we looked at different frequency times depending on the objects. That didn't really help our air conditioning engineers because they wanted to know if things weren't good, they wanted to know was it the fault of bad programming or was it a particularly rare event in the outside climate. So they wanted to know not how often it happens, but when it happens. So we went on, first of all, to develop a probabilistic approach based on extreme value theory. Unfortunately, this is 2008, and we had a stock exchange crash in 2008, and stock exchange risks are based on extreme value theory, so didn't go very far. But it allowed us to say there's twice as much chance of something happening here than there, therefore 4 times as much chance, whatever it is. It was a probabilistic model, but not one that the engineers particularly liked. We went on to develop something that we called the RH event model, where we're looking at an allowable range of climates based on a long-term average and a short-term response of at least the surface of objects, and seeing where these might cause strains. That's this down here, and that would say we think we might have problems here, here. Anyway, we at least know where to look. So where the curves cross, where the grey curves and the red curves cross, that's where we have dangers. So we've gone from a situation where we have a very carefully controlled maximum and minimum climate, which was sort of in line, maybe, or at least our recommendation, we're in line with BS 5454, where we were storing things, and we had a fairly broad range of allowed climates and galleries, to looking more at events and what might happen to our objects. And it has been my experience, it's personal view, that climate standards as a whole are often misused because we use them because we don't want to take responsibility, and therefore we use them to pass the blame on something else. I remember a case in Australia at a very well-known museum, which I won't mention, where they had a case of an outbreak, a problem, actually with these Legionellas, and they just said, well, they followed all the standards, so it wasn't their fault. Well, actually it's their fault. We've gone from these tight standards, perhaps, to something a bit more...
And secondly, you must be a pirate for the Pirates Code to apply.
A bit more general.
And thirdly, the code is more what you call guidelines.
To guidelines. I don't know, Pirates of the Caribbean, this particular version of Pirates of the Caribbean mentions guidelines about 15 times. This is just the one I thought was best. I don't know if you can see it. So we've now got from the BS 54, we've gone to a PASS standard, which is much more about, these are the things you might want to worry about. This is how People have dealt with it in the past. You make your choice. Of course, you have to take your responsibility. But we still have quite a deterministic model about what's going on. So does it work? So we have quite sophisticated monitoring tools. We have quite sophisticated analytical tools. Here is a piece of 18th century Chinese wallpaper on display in British galleries, and it developed a tear. Actually, it developed a tear more than once. We don't know exactly when it developed a tear, because these things, once you see them, it's obvious. But before you see them, the damage might be there for a long, long time until you notice it. So we looked at the climate, and indeed, in our RH events, there is something happening here where you could say, yeah, you stretch the paper and it could break, but we actually didn't notice the tear until quite some time, well over 6 months later. So from this event, is the tear happening when our causal model says it's happening when we don't know? So we have some other examples. We have an example of a Sicilian puppet display poster, which is made on very, very poor quality paper from the turn of the 20th century, which was in a conservation studio, very fragile, it was undergoing treatment, and we know it was in one piece at 6 o'clock on the evening when the conservators left, and we know it was in 2 pieces the next morning. So we go to our climate event analysis, and we look at it and we say, cool, blimey, nothing's going on there, and that's where it tore. I mean, it's not even here. It's there. What's the cause of it? So causal models may not be the best way forward. And climate interaction models tend to be too deterministic, in my opinion. This is quite a complex interaction. There may be hysteresis. There may be some kind of incubation periods. All of these things are quite difficult to program or to analyze. We have new opportunities for looking at different technologies for advanced data treatment, for trying to understand more. And we are, luckily, in this situation where standards are becoming less prescriptive and more general advice, which I think is a very good thing. But it does mean that you have to think, which makes it, you have to take responsibility, but I don't think that's a bad thing, personally. Sustainability is more and more of a challenge to us all, for reasons we'll address in a minute. And I have one piece of very good news to share about the DNA, and that is that this is our climate display certificate. So every public building has to have one of these. Ours is in the cloakroom on the way in, you can see. And last year, this is last year's certificate, we haven't done this year yet. So they're usually due end of March, takes a while to process them, should be up in about 3 weeks. Last year we went from E, under average, to D, above average. So we've gone from 17 terawatt hours, just to put it in perspective, 17 terawatt hours per year to 13 terawatt hours per year, or 13 and a half, in the space of 3 years. That's pretty good. So this was due to looking at how we were producing our heating, being quite ambitious with what we were doing with our air conditioning, where we have air conditioning, and actually quite a lot of it is LED lighting, which again we don't have everywhere, but we have quite a few galleries which have LED lighting. And they say, what's the mantra? Reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce is the most important thing. Recycle is probably a waste of time. And reuse is a good idea, but reduce is the main one, and that's what we're doing, luckily, in this particular instance, because we've been in a very fortunate position to be able to do that. As a species, we make very, very complex decisions very, very quickly. So we simplify the data we get, predominantly for survival, predominantly for reproduction. That's where we come from, that's what we do. In that kind of decision-making process, uncertainty is not really a good thing. However, in a society, an unbiased view of uncertainty is often more important. You don't need to know the answer, you need to know what its outer parameters are, where it lies. And that's very, very important. However, when we construct stories, we have things like the endowment principles at work, we have confirmation bias at work, and our decisions are actually based on coherence of the story, of our story that we invent, and not on the quality of the data, which we're very bad at judging. We're about as bad at judging quality of data and quantity of data as we are at judging light levels with our eyes. That's not what they were for. That's not what we were produced for. I come to a case in point. That's this particular document. This was published in 2015. Huge cries in the press saying, finally, everybody agrees, climate change. Notice they don't call it global warming anymore. Global warming went out the window because the evidence was very poor, so they rephrased it as climate change. And they published this document, and the problem with this document was it had very specific recommendations to policymakers. I have some of them here. I don't expect you to read them, but there's a whole list of these recommendations for policymakers, simplified down. It still has a lot of words like uncertainty, 95% confidence, this, that, and that. But within a week of this document coming out, 20% of the scientists who were involved with producing this document in the United Nations retracted their name, some of them very, very publicly, some of them very, very senior. A lot of this might be conspiracy and hearsay and so on, but there is this very nice survey that was done by somebody who's doesn't believe in climate change, and I have to say I'm neutral on the point. I just think it's a great pity that the whole debate has become a political debate and not a scientific debate, and that's where I think the problems lie. But they did a survey of scientists about how many of the scientists involved that they talked to believed the 95% confidence limits that were given in the report. And it was 43% of the scientists believed the 95% confidence limits. So it's a question where those 95% confidence limits came from. It's particularly interesting for us because this is the Royal Society, and it has a motto which says, take no one's word for it, i.e. find out for yourself. That's how I interpret the motto. And there it is, Normus Inverbia. It is an established rule of the society to which they will always adhere. This is back in 1753. Never to give their opinion as a body upon any subject, either of nature or of art, that comes before them. And yet, the Royal Society has become an organ for propagating climate change things. Maybe correctly, maybe incorrectly, but there are people in the Royal Society, quite senior people in the Royal Society, unfortunately not quite as famous as this man, who used to be on the screens. But at the same time as this story came out, there was a story, I think 3 pages further on, this is the Daily Mail. It's the font of all knowledge, like the Metro. I'm going to use very down-to-earth scientific references in my talk, as you can see. This was by one of the foremost scientists, I think, in the Royal Society, saying why it is wrong that the society has become a campaigning tool. Not because the message is wrong, but it's not the right function of that society. And because, in his opinion, the arguments, the uncertainties around those arguments are too great to make the predictions that are being made. And climate change has become a tool for taxation. So it's a political tool. So whether it's right or wrong, whether we're destroying the environment or not, is not actually the point I'm talking about. I'm talking about what evidence are we using to make those decisions and to back them up, and how much is the value, and what is that value, how do we make those decisions, and are we making them in the right way? You will notice I'm not going to give you any answers. I'm in a privileged position of not having to, because I'm too old to think about answers. So it says, Michael Kelly fears that climate change is ignoring the science. He accuses the organisation of becoming dogmatic about climate change. Basically, if you're not in, if you don't agree, you're thrown out, and that's a very non-scientific thing to do. And there are plenty of examples where, very, very high profile examples, where things have gone wrong with the climate change models. So in about 5 years' time, I think all of the Himalayas should have melted, all the glaciers should have gone. All of that data was found to be wrong. There were mistakes in the calculations. But as a prediction, it was published at the time. This is 2013, I think. Retracted 2013 as well. But it was there for quite a while. The history of having warmer and warmer summers, well, I mean, there's this idea that we're getting weirder and weirder weather, but I think the weather in Britain's been weird ever since I've been here. So, I don't know. I think we don't have very good memories. That's what I think. So, I suggest we have to make our own minds up. I particularly like this cartoon by Nemi. This is another font of all wisdom. This is Metro. This is Nemi saying to an ad which says pink is the new black, that stupid is the new smart. I'm afraid that Nemi might be closer to the truth than the pink being the new black. Coming back to things at the V&A, so now we'll talk about light, we talk about climate, we skirt around light. So we know things fade for a long, long time. Here's an example This is Raphael's, one of the Raphael cartoons, the Mirror Start with Fishes. It's quite interesting because in the tapestry, which we had in the same gallery in 2006, we had the original tapestries, or a few of them, 6 of them I think, in the galleries in 2006 for a few months. And the gallery, the tapestries are still very rich in colours, been looked after differently. And you can see very much that they're also quite garish. But Jesus certainly was red, and you can see by the reflections. And this is faded, obviously. We know, because when we did the work, when the gallery was closed, that madder was used in the cloak, and vermilion was used in the reflection. Vermilion is known to be less light, to be more light fast, less light sensitive than the madder. Under a microscope, you can still see particles of madder, so you can still see that there should be some red in his cloak. There are other issues with things changing. Some of the colours in the background change. This is a very, very big piece. If you've never seen them, they're fantastic. We have some stately homes with some very, very, very poor copies of the Raphael cartoons, which is quite interesting, because they were sold as being by Raphael. It's one of these business in fine art is a long-established thing in the UK, and it's not always the quality of the item which counts. It's often just the name that's attached to it. So anyway, so the enormous thing, 4 meters long, some 2 meters high maybe, and on display permanently in the Raphael cartoon hall. These belong to the royal family, that belong to the Queen. I think, yes, there we are. This is the tapestry of the same cartoon. So it's a mirror image because the cartoon was made to make the tapestries that we expect, and you can see how strong the colours are. There's a bit of change in design as well. So the tapestry makers took a little bit of liberty, but didn't follow the cartoon exactly. And that's a close-up of Jesus there. Very rare. We've known about light in museums for a long, long time. Long, actually, even before Gary Thompson, who here is receiving his Plowden Medal. And this is an article from 1961 he wrote, where he says, "It is only after realising the meanings of conservation that lighting can be properly planned, or can properly be planned," because he was good at English, unlike me. But actually, even long before that, this is the Ellison bequest in the V&A in the late 19th century. They have curtains, and the curtains were dropped so that when there was nobody in the gallery, or when the gallery was closed, these particular paintings were protected, not exposed to daylight, or exposed to daylight as little as is consistent with their proper public display. Quite advanced things. I mean, curtains, we don't use them anymore because people don't like them. They're very sort of obtrusive, but they're actually a very good idea. Because of all the controversy, because of the originally it was gas lighting, because of the artificial lighting used in the V&A, and all the controversy and the arguments with the National Gallery about what was or what was not happening to the watercolours on display at the V&A did commission the Russian Anatomy report in 1888, so again, a long time ago, but maybe it's the first thing. It's only those rays of the spectrum which are absorbed that can do this work. That is already quite a forward-thinking thing. They have tables of sensitivities of different pigments in this report. They have tables of sensitivities at different RH levels for all of these pigments. Different wavelength ranges. It's quite phenomenal. It's a lot of work. And very, very useful. What have I got here? Our experiments show that by far the greatest change in pigments are caused by the blue and violet component of white light, and that these predominate in light from the sky, whilst they are less in sunlight and infused cloud light, and are present in comparative small proportion in the artificial lights usually employed in lighting a room or gallery. So that was an argument to allow artificial lighting. So the V&A was the first museum to be open late. I think originally it was open 3 times a week to 10 o'clock. We do it once a week now. It's more than enough. But so it was part of the mission of the V&A to have that. But I'm not here representing the V&A again. So I'm here giving you my ideas. Here is, hang on, where are we? Russell, I think, so it hasn't, oh, there we are, this one. This is Nicholas Hilliard. Now, this is the earliest example I know. Hilliard was the artist, perhaps now accredited with bringing the Renaissance to Britain. He's a miniaturist. He was particularly good at rendering, for instance, jewels and so on in his miniature paintings. And he wrote a treatise. I don't think it was ever published, and I did manage to get hold of this handwritten copy, which I thought, when I first got hold of it from National Archive, copy, not the real one, it might be his. And then I read it and I found it was written by 2 different hands. I thought I made a huge discovery. But of course it was well known, but it's not his. So that was unfortunate. But anyway, if you were to go through this, first of all, it's called A Treatise on the Art of Limning. Limning is miniature painting in Old English. And he goes through all sorts of things about which pigments to use. And he also goes in, if you turn the pages, I'm just showing you because I didn't scan all the things. And if you get to page, was it 11? Now for a word or two. As you see, there's no breaks. It's pretty continuous. And there's margin notes where things carry on. But now for a word or two of, and then turn the page, or not. There you go. So if you can read that, so I typed it for you. Of colours which are fit for liming and which are not. All ill-smelling colours, all ill-tasting, such as orpiment, verdigris, verditer, pink, sap green, lipless, and any unsweet colours are naught for liming. Use none of them if you may choose. Unfortunately, he used quite a lot, particularly orpiment. He was very fond of orpiment, but it wasn't just orpiment he used. So we don't know if this was trying to throw other people off the track. You can't do as good a painting as me because you can't use the right colours, or whether he's just saying, look, use them if you have to. But if you could find something which gave you the same colours, which isn't so light sensitive, that would be better. So we've known about light sensitivity, we've known about pigments and their relative differences in light sensitivity for an awfully long time. And we have very many ways of saving things from light exposure. This is one of my favourites. This was a drawer, it's still there in the British Gallery. And the reason I particularly like this is it doesn't function very well. It's a failed experiment. But I particularly like it. Kids love it. But adults only tend to be aware of it when there's a big sign up saying out of order. Which is unfortunate because the button's a bit too low. But you press this and the drawer opens, so you only get exposure when the drawer's open, obviously. And then you lean over and you look at these book leaf miniatures, so they're very sensitive to vibration. So it's a very, very slow opening drawer, and a very, very smooth opening and closing mechanism. But actually, it's only when you get interested in seeing something, the drawer decides to close. Fair enough. Maybe you come back. I think we should have a 10-pence slot. The other thing we did in the British galleries, these are just some examples. I quite like this. This is the torch idea. So we have things in what we call shadow boxes. The V&A have things in what they call shadow boxes, and these fibre optic torches next to them. So this is Holbein's Anne of Cleves, so beginning of the 16th century. Anne of Cleves, of course, one of the wives of Henry VIII, survived. Holbein survived, having painted Anne of Cleves, shown them to Henry VIII. Henry VIII having gone, I want to marry this woman. Oh no, she's not as pretty as you said. Holbein survived that as well, quite amazing. You can see it's there, but if you want to see it closely, you can pick up this torch. So if it's something very small, it works quite well. And then you can really have a good look at what's there. But the shadow box is meant to be an invitation, so you can see things, but not in great light. We know that as a society, we use some 30%, well, 20%, 15%, it says here 20% domestic, of total energy for lighting. At the V&A, it's nearer 30% as we receive that. So we know it's quite an important thing. So we've done quite a lot of work on lighting. We start on fugacity of colorants other than watercolors. Started with some work, this is Charlie Costain from CCI, who suggested that we should maybe use small pieces of the artifacts themselves to see how they respond to light rather than making rock subjects. And this is then me, young me, looking at Bullswood carpet, probably 1999, 1998. So we did a lot of calculations about how you see a colour, how it fades, how quickly it fades, what is a just notable change. So traditionally you would get your colour, your reference colour, you put them up against some other reference chart and you try and match, and maybe you measure how far in you are, or you have some number which will tell you how well you match, and you do it 20 times and you see what kind of variation you get. So this is a matching experiment. Alternatively, the other matching experiments were done with light, so this is how Maxwell got the idea of the gamut of colours like Q and C. So you have a test colour and a target colour, matching a target colour and a test colour, and you change the light balance to get the same colour. But again, it's a matching experiment. We didn't want to know how well you can match a colour. We wanted to know I wanted to know in particular, when you can see the difference between two colours, which may not be the same thing. As a matter of fact, it's pretty much the same thing, but you have to test these things. So we did an experiment with lots and lots of colours, lots of people looking at Jonathan was one of my subjects. Yeah, I've got your scores, haven't you? Yeah. Your response.
Is he good?
Yeah, good, of course, fantastic, in fact. Ideal lighting circumstance, 1000 lux, light box, grey, don't wear any bright colours on the day you're doing this. Can you tell the difference between those two? Probably not, they're meant to be identical. But can you tell the difference between those two? Well, that was sort of the range of colour differences. This was in red, but that was the range of colour difference that people were being given to look at. And they were just asked whether they could tell the difference or not. And if they could tell the difference, if they could tell it easily or not. And actually the only thing that I was interested in is, could they tell the difference or not? We get all this work, we do all these wonderful things. What's it tell us? It tells us how fast bits, how much exposure until there might be a just noticeable change. If you had perfect reference to something, you could look at it under ideal lighting in a museum, when you might be able to 50% chance to detect that difference. But here's a set of artificial, this is a computer simulation with actually quite large colour changes, but that's, you'll see why in a minute. Two pigments, the same pigments making two artifacts, left and right, before fading, exposed to exactly the same artificial fading, and here's the artifacts after whatever it is, I can't remember how many megalux hours. Now, the colours have changed exactly the same amount, but there's much more information remaining, obviously, in this one and in that one. So all the measurements we do can't take, well, all the simple point-for-point measurements we do can't take that into account. And actually, when you're looking at artifacts, that might be the predominant thing you should be looking at. So this was from a paper from Boris and Whitman. But it's very clear demonstration that the sensitivity of the most sensitive area of an artifact doesn't necessarily tell you much about how the artifact will fare when it's illuminated. But we do know something. So this is Petworth at Washington. Sorry, this is a country house in Britain, and this is sort of a scene you see quite a lot of. This is using light, and they use particularly light, and they reduce it to 50 lux or whatever, but using it in such a way that it has absolutely no purpose apart from to destroy what you're trying to see. I put it to you that this would look better in the dark than it does with that light on it, which is obviously a mistake, but these things happen. Here's an example at my illustrious employer. This is the Bullerswood carpet before we redisplayed it. And again, it's a question of, can you really see it? It was like this for many years in the Islamic Empire. So it's our most important textile. It's the oldest carpet in the world. It's the largest complete carpet fabric in the world. It's got all sorts of wonderful things about it, and yet, but it still says 40 minutes. I'm just going to be waiting a minute. And yet you can't really see it. So it's now on display like this. So it's on the floor in a big case, very transparent case. It's quite nicely done by copying. I think this is the most expensive display case we've ever bought. And every half an hour, because we worked out this was a frequency we could do it, the lights come on. And people come to see this effect. So they come and you can see the carpet, and it's only at 8 lux on average when the lights are off. So it's sort of 8 lux in the corners and less in the middle. But you can still see that it's got several colours, you can't see them very well. And it's at 50 lux when the lights are off. So it's only at the same light levels as the carpets in the wall are permanently lit. And yet, the experience of seeing the lights come on is something which people really enjoy. And it gives you a richer thing. It's actually also the mistake people make when they do A/B tests for different lights, is this adaptation. Your eye is very, very sensitive when things change. And it gives you a false effect, but a very pleasing effect. The next slide, I'm not going to do, but I was going to ask you what the opposite of red is. But you tell me anyway. But not. Green. Right, green is what we say in Europe. It's not green. Well, it depends what you mean by opposite. But no, it's not. It's never green. Yeah. So colour circle, forget it. Go and look at something red that's bright, Keep looking at it for 20 seconds and then look at something white and you will see turquoise, bluish. It's got some greenish tinge to it. You won't see green. And the opposite of blue is not yellow, just in case you're wondering. It's peach, maybe. Depends on what blue. And grey is not always grey. So this is a checkerboard, supposed to be. This is the Adelson used. I'm only going to show two of these things. This is the strongest one that I know of. Adelson, I can't remember, 1980s or so. This square is meant to be a dark square. This square is meant to be a light square. Do you agree? Just say yes. So I bring down a square which I match sort of with that grey square, and I'm just going to move it to the other square. I'm not changing its colour. And so if you measure them, they are the same. So now my question becomes more philosophical. If they look different, which is more important, the measurement or the appearance? So if I take the surrounds away from this object, they look the same. And I'm saying to you, I haven't changed them. But actually, I have changed them. I'm taking the surround away. So what's more important, what it looks like or what we measure? Oh, I'll just go back and they see a very strong illusion. I've got a stronger one right at the end just to keep you there. The strongest thing I know. This is very, very strong as well. You can print this in small. You're meant to look at it and count the black dots. And lo and behold, there are no black dots. So it's a bit like an American voting slip. These things have been explained. These properties of the way the eye works show that the eye is not a monetary thing. It's not a meter. It doesn't do anything linear. It doesn't do anything boring. It does something really, really clever. So it excludes changes in luminance, it excludes changes in color temperature, and it allows you to make sense of your environment, allows you to pick ripe fruit against green foliage, things like that which would otherwise be impossible to do. You can manipulate it, you can cheat. And good gallery design can make use of that to make a space appear bright and reduce light noise. So 1994 this is. A little while before, 10 years before, we had Raymond Lafontaine, who came up with this lovely proposal that he would use a particular light to see through varnish. So this was adapting the light to look through, I don't believe it, I've never seen it, but this is the paper he published. So this is the picture, and this is it illuminated normally, nice and yellow varnish through it. And by changing the qualities of the light, you can see through the varnish, you can see the original picture. Now he only proposed this as a investigation tool, as a tool for the conservator or the curator to be able to see through discoloured varnish, but of course nothing stays the way it's planned. So back in 2010 at Hampton Court, it's the first place I know where they did it, they took one of their Henry VIII tapestries, Story of Abraham, fantastic tapestry, quite badly faded after 500 years, and they projected an image on it which they corrected, and apparently that's what it would have looked like originally. Quite a nice effect. I don't know if it's realistic. Projected colours are different from reflected colours, and I don't know whether I like this, because do you actually need to have the tapestry there at all? Can't you just project an image? And do you then have the object? And is its condition not part of what the object is? Isn't it inherent in the object that it does decay? And we go one further with the Rothkos. So these are the Rothkos redisplayed in Harvard in a specially lit museum with lots and lots and lots of digital projectors. These are the digital projectors. And they're projecting the colours back onto these Rothkos, because these Rothkos were displayed in a way where they totally faded. So they're black and grey. And yet here you can see pink. And I think that's an Andrea coming on. This is just showing you what the projector's projecting. So it's actually projecting something even on the black and something on the pink to give the colours back. And just to give you one example, this is panel number 5. This is the panel number 5 as it looks now. And this is panel number 5 as it looks when it has projected illumination. Now, interestingly enough, just like at the V&A, where people come to see when the lights come on, people came to see the Rothkos when the lights went off, because they felt it was fake. Maybe they're just well educated, I don't know. But it's one of these questions, how much of it is a gimmick, how much of it is real information, what is the purpose, what is a real object, why do we have real sensitive things on display, why don't we just make facsimiles, why don't we have them in our home? And why do we go to museums? What's the point of a museum? What is culture? So we have here, this is from my brother. I asked him to do 3 cartoons for me this time. He's done one before, that was the one with the umbrella. But this is the, oh dear, well, there were more agents of deterioration. Language is an important thing. I'm coming on to that in a minute. That will be one of my kind of things. But yes, 15 drop 5, so there's only 10 agents of deterioration. I don't like the term. A lot of people like it, but it has a sense of deliberateness about it. If you're an agent of something, it really doesn't ring true to me. And anyway, I have a solution, which is you reverse it. I wanted to talk quickly. I wanted to give 2 examples of contradictions in conservation where things have been attributed and re-attributed differently as people learn more or change their minds for whatever reason. And one of them, which is possibly in some people's memory because it's quite recent, is the story of the Wolseley Angels. Now, the Wolseley Angels have a, Mr. Brackett as well, but there you go. The Wolseley Angels have a wonderful backstory because they were made in the 1530s for the tomb of Cardinal Wolsey. Cardinal Wolsey never had a tomb at the end, but they were good enough for King Henry VIII to seal them and say they were going to be part of his tomb. But King Henry VIII didn't get them either. And then they were eventually taken out of Westminster Abbey, and then the story goes a bit cold, and in the late 20th century they were seen on a stately house just lining the outside walls, and then 2 of them were stolen, actually ripped off the wall with a lorry, and then 2 of them were sold in public auction for £10,200 as garden ornaments. And then the other 2 were found again, and then they went on public display, and then they were saved for donation for, well, how much would you guess? It was 10 years between the 10,200 and 5 million was what was collected. I'm told not all of them spent on the so maybe some of them paid for conservation. But several million. Of course, there are 4 of them, not 2 of them, and 10 years have gone by, but still, pretty good investment. They're also quite interesting in that they're not bronze, and they're not brass, they're copper. Turns out other things are copper as well, of that time. So they were cast in Britain by one of the lesser Italian artists. They're not the prettiest things, but they were originally sold as in the style of Renaissance, because there is some scientific data, some scientific data which would suggest they are not from the 1530s, not from the 16th century. If you choose to ignore that data, as we do now, because there are 4 of them, they fit the story, they're the right height, they're belong together, there are mends to the copper which are, so the styling and the tooling is consistent with them being from the 16th century. So we ignore that scientific data, or at least we try and find a reason for why it's not what we thought it was. I can't tell you what the scientific data is, because that's apparently top secret. So I'm not privy to that. Well, I know what it's supposed to be. Here's just a close-up. There are 2 brown ones and 2 green ones, and that's because they were separated and treated differently, and the brown ones have been renovated somewhat. There's another story, this is quite interesting. These are the Corker miniatures. These are now attributed to Nicholas Hill, as they were originally. But in the 80s, I think they were attributed to George Perfect Harding as a copy, and of course became instantly a template of that. George Perfect Harding had at this stage become suspected of being a forger as well as a copyist. He was a copyist and did some identification of miniatures. And the reason this was work done in the DNA exam, but one of the reasons that they were seen as not being right is there is this reflective coating on them, which is very untypical for the 16th century miniatures. And there was another thing which led the people who were doing the identification to assume the wrong thing. So there was an inscription on the back of this particular miniature, and this miniature is attributed to Samuel Cooper because it has the right signature in it. But on the back it says, Henry into the blah, 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 that's the sitter. And in the book it said, blah, 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 by GPH. Now, when the miniature is sealed, you can't see the back. So people thought this was actually a Harding fake, that he was initializing it as a fake. But actually we now have reinterpreted that, having taken it apart, seeing there's no by, so we think this is just a note, this is a later piece of paper, added to the back of the miniature, saying the sitter for this has been identified as Henry to whatever. So that piece of information turns things around, and then also there's been a lot more work done on the on how Hilliard drew his particularly his pearls and other gemstones, which he's particularly good at. A lot of work done on this. And when you look close up at these miniatures, that's all consistent. That wasn't known when Harding would have had to make copies in the 19th century, and therefore it's now quite sure that these are correctly assigned to him and have regained their value. So there are, in this particular story, or in these two stories, several strands which have to come together. And when they come together nicely, we're convinced we have the right story. That's okay. So scientific analysis being one of them, physical examination, historical sources, all these things tie up. And when they tie up nicely, we've got a nice story and we believe it. The problem is often they don't quite match. And often they don't match at all, and we still believe it. And we believe it for all sorts of reasons. This was for May. I don't know if she's still here. There we go, May. This is, again, I don't like the word citizen scientist, and I know it's a misunderstanding of what citizen scientist is. This is my citizen astronaut who can't be bothered to get change, and therefore will become a scientist today. That's not a serious point. But, the confirmation bias, I can't explain it nearly as well as Luther in Epistles. Oops, come back, Luther. Should. I'll do it like this.
Of the confirmation bias.
Beg your pardon?
We all do it. Sort of see things in a way that support what you already believe. So you form an opinion and then you create a theory and then you work hard to prove it.
There you go. That's what we do, all of us. This is my prediction. 1987, there is no storm. Okay, enough said about that one. These are some more recent, rather unfortunate events which have had very happy outcome. So, it's got to be the Metro with a title like that. Could have been the Sun, I guess. Tut, it's gluten cum. Okay, so he had his beard broken off and apparently he was glued together very, very badly. Huge public outcry, glued back on, lots and lots of people go see it. So it actually has become more popular. In this particular instance, it doesn't, Tutankhamun was always popular, so it doesn't actually need extra popularity. But these things can have positive Bible effects, as the next story shows, which again is one which I hope you will remember. So this is the eggshell one. That's the sort of original version. This is probably what the one in the church sort of looked like before this 80-year-old nun who was blind decided to patch it up, and it looked like that. And apparently she was distraught. But, so this is, fresco, botched up, blah, 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 despite good intentions, but this thing just come up with a problem. So this was quite nice. This was an art event. So, first of all, it says Spanish town saved because suddenly everybody wanted to see this thing. Everybody. So they all went, they all spent lots of money. And then they had these events in museums where you could go dressed like that. Apparently, to scare a conservative. Should talk a little bit about value, and I am getting towards winding up slowly. So value is of course perceived in different ways. There is a suggestion about the roles here. These are just suggestions, you can swap them around as you wish, but it might be the layout, how you arrange things, how neatly things fit on your shelf. It might be the object itself, or it might be the monetary value. And these roles, and we all have all of these roles within us, but we might steer further to one than another. And sometimes it's quite difficult to get the right language between the different ways of looking at things. So, this is Ronnie Corbett.
I look down on him because I am upper class. I look up to him because he is upper class. But I look down on him because he is lower class. I am middle class. I know my place. I look up to them both. But I don't look up to him as much as I look up to him. Because he has got innate breeding. I have got innate breeding, but I have not got any money. Sometimes I look up to him. I still look up to him. Because although I have money, I am vulgar. But I'm not as vulgar as him. So I still look down on him. I know my place.
Right, well, I will leave you to say which one is which role, and of course this is in honour of Ronnie Corbett, who passed away quite recently. I want to come on to communication, and then I'm going to do ethics. These are two short things. Communication is very important. I have just a couple of things. This was my local gym, and this was there for about 2 weeks. I mean, it changed. It was always there. Now, what kind of message is that giving you? Take your pick. This one shouldn't be there, don't want that, don't want that. This one I want. This is Ryanair, and I remember sitting on a flight. There's a whole flight, 2 hours flight. I was looking at this one. I was thinking, what the hell is that? So, plane's going down, and you're looking and thinking, what the hell am I supposed to do? I have got a close up. What's that? What is it? What is it? I'm going to die. I don't know what it is. What is it? It isn't earrings. It's much clearer in the photo. Because I only found out what it was when I looked at the photo, I have to say. So throughout the fight, I thought, I have no idea what that is. Very poor communication. Here is a very good piece of communication. Do you speak Portuguese? This is a Portuguese sign. This is in Brazil on a local beach. I think everybody would immediately see what that sign is warning you about. And in case you don't, it's kicking the stones. And not to be...
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das ist das Überlebensradar.
Mayday, mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
Here's another naming cartoon which says the same thing. So you push the banana thingy and blah blah blah, quite nice, and people are very happy with that. If you have the right language, you will get your message across. I wanted to look at a different type of...
New is not always better, as with almost anything. But what's interesting with food culture, and also a little bit scary, is that the second you stop practicing, it tends to die out really quickly.
So if you get watercolors...
After one generation, you will have no one left who knows how to do something with their hand. And after 3 generations, the only thing that's left is photos or something like that. And you can't go back and understand how someone did something 1,000 years ago with food like you can with sculpture or painting or whatever it might be. You can actually look at a marble block carved in ancient Greece and you can see how it was done. But there aren't any cured hands from ancient Greece that are still there to show us how that was done. It makes food culture very special because it is also the most important cultural manifestation that we have, because we all have to eat.
Food culture, the most important cultural manifestation that we have. News to me, but possible. Where does culture come from? This is the third man. He's not meant to start, but...
That way, for 30 years under Boris, they had warfare, terror, murder. bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance in Switzerland that I brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace. And what did that produce? The cuckoo clock. So long now.
Okay, there you go. So maybe you need tension to produce, I don't know, but very good film anyway. And it might be out of copyright. This is something that was up on our website at the end of the year, we doing performance appraisal. I thought, what the hell is that? And of course it tells you what it is down here, so I've blown it up a bit. It's a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. It's quite a nice thing. I don't know what the rest of the diagram is, it's a bit confusing, so I put it in. I wanted to talk quickly about ethics. And who better to ask about ethics than Martin Wolf, the director of the DNA, and a fellow German speaker. So he wasn't available. So I thought we'd ask Timothy Ross instead, as you can see. And this is what Timothy has to say.
Ethics. That's always so inconvenient.
That's it. Ethics are inconvenient. I think that's very true. So I have one thing left to show you. This is, I said, the strongest illusion you will see. I think.
Ba.
I don't know if you saw this, part of the BBC Two Horizon program. What is it? What's he saying? Keep looking at the screen. Okay. So he's saying ba. Are we all What's he saying? Close your eyes. Open your eyes. Look left. And look right. So, don't believe a word. Is what I'm saying. And the last thing I want to say is ideas can spark huge things and can be very, very powerful. But they don't have to be right to be powerful. And that's what you need to guard against. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Boris. I suspect there's going to be quite a few questions in the room. Can I ask you, if you do have a question, if you could give your name and introduce where you come from as well, just so Boris has an idea of where the question's coming from. Mark, down the back.
Hi, Mark Kearney, UCL. Boris, in the new British galleries, there seems to be quite a lot of plastic thistles on the chairs on open display. And I wonder how much of having things open on display is then poorly translated into the actual display when you have people sitting on the chairs when you shouldn't have them sitting on the chairs. And what kind of conversations happen after after the design has been implemented, but people still sit on the chairs?
The V&A has over 1,000 cameras. So they're quite good at telling people not to sit where they're not meant to. I don't think that's quite a big problem for us. There are some quite neat solutions that the National Trust have got some nice, quite discreet solutions where they put a little prickle thing on the, I mean, you know if there's something there you're not meant to sit on it. People still do, that is a problem. People touch furniture that they know they're not supposed to. They try and open drawers which are particularly delicate, where it's got signs on saying, look, please don't touch. That will always happen, but that's the sort of naughty side, trying to get away with it, or you might find treasure inside, you never know. I worry about open display for other reasons. Particularly I think in the medieval and Renaissance galleries, I used to go around and I used to see, you always see some signs of change, and some of them are quite slow, so you're not used to them. I am of the impression, and perhaps it's just because I'm getting older and my memory is fooling me, but I am convinced we are using more paint of our gilded things, of our painted things on open display than we were 10 years ago. And I think that the V&A is, I wouldn't say playing roughshod with its collections, but it is very much interested in the now and less interested in the future, whereas perhaps before it was much more interested in the future and not so much interested in the now. And where that balance lies, I mean, that's a directorial decision. And it's not one for me to make. But it's always worrying when you see flakes of paint. Well, I don't know if it's the same flake of paint as seen week after week, or if it's a new one every time.
Yes.
Andy Calver, Imperial War Museum. Boris, can't you look at the Conservators' condition reports and tell whether they're new or old flakes of paint?
No, because they're not usually done in that to that extent. If you've got, I mean, I am talking about fairly small flakes of paint, luckily. I'm not talking about. So if you have an area of loss, whether it's grown by 1%, you're not going to tell from our condition reports, not unless it becomes something which they're trying to draw attention to, i.e. when something's travelling and that's a particularly delicate area or something. We don't have regular condition reports for the things we have on display. We just don't. We have too many. I'm sure the Imperial War Museum do too.
No, yeah, we don't do exhibit reports.
Because
they're a waste of time, because you can never tell whether anything changes conditions, so we stopped doing that.
We did have a proposal to start taking good photographic records of a set of maybe 3 objects in each gallery which would be chosen as sort of canary, we call it canary objects project. But it hasn't really got support, so the idea was to take methodical photographs but not analyse them, but just have them, so that when you go back to, I've seen a flake of paint, now I want to see, is that loss of? You've got something where you can then do the work and track backwards. So far, it hasn't taken off, but it was a way of trying to invest a little amount of time and good cameras and good technique to gather information in an epidemiological.
But if you're potentially saying that nobody can tell if it's significant or not, so how do you judge, how do you weigh up whether this loss is significant over what? It's almost, I mean, it's exactly the same. Slow loss of the paint is the same as the relative loss of colour or something. Loss, significance.
Yeah.
You know, unless you do try and quantify it and engage other people in decisions, it almost becomes pointless. Display in a case, not in a case, this, that. You know, surely you do need to try and quantify it to get other people to take responsibility. We accept the rate of loss of this pigment because it's a very small amount every 10 years or something. Surely that's a good thing to try and quantify.
Absolutely. My worry is I see this on an annual basis and not on a 10-yearly basis. And it's only a question, as you rightly say, it's a question of extent and rate. It's going to happen. I'm uncomfortable thinking it's happening more often than it used to. Whether it was happening hardly at all before and is now happening at an acceptable rate, I don't know. And what an acceptable rate is also, as many people who ask me, there's many opinions. But yeah, we should quantify things, absolutely. But there should be 70 hours in a day.
I think there was a question over here.
Yeah. I'm Pretzel from Natural History Museum, and you mentioned microfading, and also you mentioned confirmation bias. So I was wondering, what do you stand on the interpretation of data from microfading?
I think microfading is a very useful tool. It's not a very precise tool. And in its original manifestation, that's the microfading, as it was produced as a piece of equipment you could buy, it's meant to distinguish between fugitive and non-fugitive media. And that it does well and quickly. If you're trying to say, ooh, this one is 10% more fugitive than something else, that it does quite poorly. So then the technique, because of the very small spot size that you're using, therefore it's statistically an issue about significance, because of the difficulty in focusing, so you never know exactly where your light beam is focusing, because of no easy way of monitoring the output from that very, very bright 7 million, 10 million lux light source you're using, throws it out of the realm of comfort. There are also some work that's been done at Yale at the moment about fading rates being actually quite dependent on illumination intensity, and not that there are, and actually there are pockets when things become particularly accelerated. And their work has suggested, their early work suggests that actually things fade faster at around 50 to 250 lux comparatively than they would at 1,000 lux. They will fade faster at 1,000 lux, but they won't fade at 4 times the rate, they'll fade twice the rate. And therefore 1 million lux, 5 million lux, may underestimate the response rate. But you're not measuring that precisely anyway. So I think people who try and get very precise measurements from Paul Whitmore's microfading technique are misusing the intention of that.
Hi Boris, Matthias Serlich, UCL Institute for Sustainable Heritage. Thanks for the lecture, it was really thought-provoking. You made us think very fast. But I wonder, could you elaborate on your stance regarding citizen science? Volunteering has its role in conservation, I suppose, and citizen science has proven to be very successful in environmental science.
I think there are, for me, it's an discomfort with the term, and I think there are specific things which are done very well. For instance, records of rainfall wouldn't have been done without people actually recording these things in that background. Species coming into, bird species coming into the country, things like that. You need volunteers to gather the data. My worry is that if the data is not worth enough to make us actually make a professional get it, are we attributing the right value to it? That's one question. Same with volunteers in conservation. If the job is important, should we be asking people to do it for free in their spare time? I also have an issue, not an issue, it's not a real issue, I have discomfort with the name, because it has been, to me, it conjures up this idea that people will wake up in the morning and say, today I'm going to be a dentist, tomorrow a fireman. It's fine, we should have ambitions, and we should think there's nothing that we cannot achieve, but you can't become a scientist, or a dentist, or a doctor, or a conservator without going through the appropriate training. That's not what citizen scientists are, I do appreciate that. But that's what the term conjures up in my mind, and I think that's my discomfort. So it's not the thing, it's not the volunteering. There is some discomfort with relying on volunteers when I don't think we should have to. But it's the term I find uncomfortable.
So like in conservation volunteering, it's standards that we need to upkeep and ensure that any measurements that are done are repeatable and
if they're valuable,
certain.
Yeah. So if you're trying to get opinion, which sometimes is very important, that's a very different thing. If you're trying to get numerical data, it does need to be, you do need to be consistent in how you do it.
What about if you need people to take photos of the paint flakes on the floor every day? Would something like that be useful?
No, because I think it's better to take photos of the objects. And there we have a debate. Well, who should take the photos? Should it be a photographer? Should it be a conservator? Should it be... The answer is somebody else. It's always somebody else. I haven't got time. But actually, I'm thinking, it's a gift. You know, you get, let's say, 2 days every 6 months to walk around the galleries and take photographs. I can't understand why people aren't queuing up. But they're not.
Okay, one last question.
Philippa from University of Lincoln. I was just wondering, did you find that having conservation as an event, like the lights on the carpet, did that make visitors more acceptable of environmental sort of compromises elsewhere, as having sort of like garden do, or didn't they sort of connect the two?
I think visitors are actually very forgiving on the whole. I think what was surprising for me about that thing, I mean, the half an hour was chosen for a number of reasons. One of them being the exposure, so we have 15 of these intervals a day, and that way we could moderate the exposure to where we were comfortable the carpet wouldn't change at an unacceptable rate. But actually it also shows it to be something special, and it therefore is more important than the other carpets in that area. And it is more important than the other carpets in that area, and there's no question about it. So it's a double win. It's a way of protecting the artifact, but also giving it some kind of star status. Half an hour, the studies also said people who were interested would on average be in the gallery for at least, on average at least, typically at least 40 minutes. So everybody gets a chance to see it, because we were talking about doing other things like having it on only at lunchtime. There are other ways you could dose out, but this 10 minutes every half hour, 10 minutes is enough to see it comfortably, and every half hour is enough that you don't have to wait too long to see it. So I think it's an excellent compromise. It wasn't entirely my idea, I have to say. I just gave the outer parameters of what it had to be done. I would have liked it to have been my idea. I approved it, but it wasn't my idea.
Okay, and I think we will take one more question.
Well, it's kind of an add-on to that. My name's Robin, I'm from UCL. And I was, with that, thinking of that same gallery, it's like, well, has communication of conservation needs become more effective for visitors over the past few decades? Is it is it likely that they're accepting this because museums have been putting things like, well, here's what happens when you touch an object, here is what like image does. So do you see a connection with that, like visitor outreach, so to speak?
I have no data, so I can only say I think I think people are more interested in conservation than maybe they would have been 40 years ago. I don't think there were many conservation departments 40 years ago. I think it's still quite a young profession. Unfortunately, I think it's seen its heyday as well. But that's another issue. And maybe it will come back. I don't know. I think it is. I think visitors are actually interested in talking to people and knowing what's going on, and they have a keen awareness that things aren't just on the wall without some effort going into it. In my opinion, the big museums in London tend to shift away. The National Gallery seems to do quite a few things now. But actually, the other museums tend to try and say, conservation's over there, and it's got to be behind the scenes. And yes, some people go and have a tour or something, but it's not part of the object of the display. It detracts from it. And that wouldn't be how I would run it, but that is definitely the sort of flavour of DNA, for instance, that's certain. So in the monitoring experiment where we did the acoustic emission from a piece of furniture for 1.5 years, very interesting project, would have got public engaged. We had to hide. I mean, it was only allowed if no one could see the cables, if no one could see there was any technical equipment, anything that needed interaction was down outside of opening hours. And I think we missed a trick, actually. I would have liked to have had a little sign up saying, by the way, we're doing this interesting thing. And if the computer makes funny noises, don't worry.
Okay, I think we'll give Boris the rest. To join us for a wine reception, which will be up on the first floor. So you go out here through the barriers and up the stairs and follow the signs. Hello. Nice to see you. It's all right. I'll wait in the queue. There's no rush. Farmer as well. No. Yeah. That's